Hi. All right. Hi. My name is Adriel Wallach, like I said, and I am here to talk to you about this thing I've been doing where I make a game every week. I call it Game a Week. I've been doing it for the better part of this last year, and I'm going to talk about sort of the things I've learned and why I did it and the motivations behind it and what the outcome of making a game every single week has been. On the schedule, you'll probably have seen that this was supposed to be a joint talk between myself and Rami Ismail of Lambier, but in a sort of, deviation from his normal everyday routine, he is currently in an airplane. So he couldn't be here for this talk. He was in Vancouver giving a talk, and there were no flights that got him here quite in time. He is giving a talk tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'm not sure where, but if you want to watch him talk about business and that kind of stuff, then you can go and see him then. He does send his apologies and wishes he could be here, but now you get to listen to me. So, like I said, I am going to be talking about making a game a week. Like I said, I've been doing this now for the last 38 weeks. Sometimes it's harder than other weeks. Sometimes I have a lot more going on than normal. This week in particular was a bit hard because I was traveling. I was at an event in Berlin over the weekend, which was really nice. It was about local multiplayer. And I still had to find time to make this presentation and make my game this week. So what I did, instead of doing those two things separately, was I did them together. So this is my weekly game this week. This is me. I can jump, go through this door. So, I am going to start off with a brief history of myself. I have a bit of a strange background for a game developer. After graduating from university back in 2008, I started my career making satellites. I was a software developer for a next-generation weather satellite that's going to be going up the United States. And it was a nice, respectable adult job where I made money and had, job security and all sorts of things like that. However, games were sort of where my heart always lied. I made games as a kid, just sort of dabbling around in them. I played a lot of games. I was always sort of designing them. And that's really what I wanted to do. I mean, making things that go to space is awesome. That's super cool. But games. I really, really wanted games. Luckily, I lived in Boston, which is just full of developers and has a really active development community. So I started attending, developer meetups and meeting all of the people around there who make games, and luckily I was able to discover independent development, which, was a much more attainable goal for anybody. It was sort of this thing that showed me, you just sort of make games. You don't have to be part of a big company, whatever. You can just start making games. So I started making games. I made them on the weekend and after work and kept working at it. And eventually I got hired by an independent company in Boston called Firehose Games and worked with them with Harmonix on a few games. And then I moved over to a smaller commission company and made, worked on non-original IP there. And then eventually I wanted to go indie. So I did that. I gained all my experience. I gained my gumption. I got my, finances in order. And I went indie. So since leaving my full-time job, I've been doing a bunch of things. One of the big things I've done is I organize a game jam that's on a train called Train Jam. It goes from Chicago, Illinois to San Francisco, California, just right before GDC in San Francisco. It's a 52-hour train ride, and it goes through sort of like the Midwestern of the United States, and it's gorgeous, and it was fun. I also participate in game jams, and I do a lot of stuff like that. Some of the game jams I participate in are a bit more fun than others, but that's sort of a longer story for a different day that I don't feel like going into right now. So in addition to that, I've been making games. Lots and lots and lots and lots of games. But why have I been making these games? So I've been making the games because I've been making a game every week, but why have I been making a game every week? So when I went indie, when I went indie, it was about a year ago. I left my full-time job, and I, really wanted to finally give myself the opportunity to do my dream job, do the thing that I always wanted to do. So I left, and I had a whole lot of time and a whole lot of ideas, and I would wake up in the morning and I would work on those ideas, and I'd open up Unity and I'd sit behind my computer and I'd work and I'd work and I'd work. And after a nice long hard day of work, go to bed, get good night's sleep, wake up in the morning, do more stuff. I had all these ideas and all this time and all these ideas. And after all this time went by, what did I sort of have to show for myself? Well, it turns out that I had a lot of empty Unity projects and internet knowledge. I knew what was happening on Reddit most days. I was pretty up to the like current MAME knowledge. I had that kind of stuff. But yeah, other than that, I really just had nothing. Because we sort of seem to create this myth in our heads. Whoa, sorry. We sort of seem to create this myth in our heads that with enough time and resources and that we can just, bam, make the next Stanley Parable, the next Antichamber, the next Minecraft, whatever. But you can't just sort of sit down and do that. These people worked at what they were doing and worked and worked and worked until they could make those games and sort of could get to that spot. So, they made games for years. They tried new things. They failed. They succeeded. They had constraints, whether they were time constraints or financial constraints or just, a solid vision or something. Nobody just sort of sat down and made those games. And that was sort of hard to struggle with, was all this newfound freedom and this knowledge that, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing. So while I was sort of struggling with all of this and browsing Reddit all day, every day, oh, I forgot to show you that I can fly now. That was a big thing about not having constraints. There we go. So anyway, that was a big reveal. So as I was struggling with all of that, Rami was there, and he was sort of watching me struggle with this, and he started to talk a lot about the process of making a lot of games and in a short amount of time and just putting all of these constraints on yourself, because it is very hard when you have no box to think outside of that box. All of a sudden you just sort of have the world at your fingertips, and what do you do with that? So he had been talking about, making a game every week. I didn't have a constraint, so he said, why not make one game, and whatever you have by Sunday, that is what you have. Then you're done with that, and you have to move on. You have to go forward, and you have to just sort of not think about that thing you just made. So there were rules, and there were deadlines, and then finally there were constraints. And that actually seemed perfect for what I was struggling with. I had this sort of freedom paralysis with what I could do, and by finally just crushing down in the nicest way possible, like all of my freedom, I finally was creating things. So there's sort of like 4 main points to the whole Game a Week manifesto. I don't want to say they're rules. They're not, hard, fast rules. They're just sort of guidelines of what to do. So the first one, which is one of my favorite ones, is that you have the weekly deadline. It's sort of like the core mechanic, I guess, of Game a Week is having this deadline. And the weekly deadline sort of serves as a way to enforce yourself to have a solid, attainable goal. Because if you sit down with a timeline of, I'm going to make a game, what does that mean? Does make a game mean it's going to be done next week? Does it mean it's going to be done in 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now? There's nothing to sort of define how much you should be working on this and how fast you should be working on it. And what does make a game mean? Is it a game when you've sold it? Is it a game when people play it? Is it a game when you make it available? Like, what does that mean? And then, what is successful? Is it money? Is it polish? Is it learning something? And all of these things sort of just float around when you start to sit down and make a game. So by having a deadline, at least a time deadline, you sort of have an answer to one of those questions. And so it was nice because I had a solid goal. I had to create something, and then on Sunday, that was it. I still had the freedom to denote what a game was and what I wanted to work on and what mechanic I wanted to explore and what that all meant to me. But, by the end of the week, I stopped, and as long as I had something, that, you know, the challenge was met. And it was good because it also added this pressure to finish something. You know, when you have a time deadline, you're going to work on it. You don't want to disappoint that person, whoever that person is, yourself or other people. When you have the deadline, it creates pressure, and that's good. Even if it is, you know, somewhat artificial pressure that you're just making on yourself, because obviously you're not really answering to anybody just by saying, hey, I'm going to make a game this week, other than yourself. And the next part, which sort of ties into this, is that at the end of the week, when you're done making your game, you release it to the public. You sort of make it available to whoever wants to play it. I will generally put it on my website and tweet about it to a varying degree of how much I'm proud of it, but, you know, I at least put it out there for people to have the ability to play it. And that's nice because it is an added sense of accountability. Like I said, you know, it's easy to make excuses to yourself of why you can't work on this thing right this very second. You know, whether you're tired or you need to go eat a, you know, croissant, or all of a sudden the room looks really messy and you need to clean the room. There's all these reasons that we don't do things. And by sort of putting those reasons and those excuses through the lens of an outside entity, you see how just silly and unreasonable they are. And you realize, oh, I'm just making stuff up. These people don't care that I want to go eat a croissant. I'm gonna have to work on my game. And another sort of added benefit of releasing it to the public like this in this capacity is that, you know, releasing games gives you experience in releasing games, which is a terrifying experience. Even for little jam games, little game of week games, you know, hour-long games, whatever, it's still a terrifying experience. You know, this is something that you've put a little bit of your heart into, and, you know, part of your, just, it shows, you know, how good of a designer you are, how good of a developer you are, and that's terrifying. It's really, really scary to just sort of make yourself vulnerable like that. But by doing it, you know, week after week after week, the intensity starts to fade of that a little bit, and each week as you deal with the various emotions of releasing a game, it becomes a little bit easier and you become a little bit more comfortable with it. And it does really become easier. And in addition to that, you open the door for feedback, because everybody who plays your game is going to have an opinion on it. Everybody. It doesn't matter how little the game is or whatever, everybody is going to have an opinion on it. And some of those people will share that opinion with you every now and again. And listening to this feedback and analyzing what they're saying and what they want and what they didn't want and what they did like and what worked and what was broken, you know, you can take all of that stuff and you know, really apply it to each subsequent game. And every single week you're learning more and you're more and more and more, because all these people are seeing these games through a way that you aren't looking at your games. You know, they are seeing it with their own experiences and their own eyes, and you know, you sort of surprise what people can take out of a game. So that's feedback. Next. The next sort of idea is to do a new idea every week. It's kind of easy to want to just completely keep iterating on the same idea over and over and over again, because we all sort of have those ideas, those really awesome ideas that if only we had enough resources and time, they would be the best game ever. Everybody has that idea or those ideas, and you know, I finally had the time and the resources to do those. And so I spent the first few weeks going through every single one of those games that I'd been thinking about for so many years. And, you know, spoiler alert, they were not very good. Because these were ideas that I had been just sort of in my head as a concept and nothing more, and I'd never sat down and refined them, and I never sat down and focused them. They were just things that I was thinking about. So I did those, and I got them out of the way, and like I said, they weren't great, which, you know, was a bit of a morale hit. But the nice thing was then, you know, I had cleared all these ideas out, and I now had new space in my head to just be constantly inspired by everything around me. Because there's sort of weeks now where I will spend the first few days worrying that, you know, I've used up all the ideas in the world. There are no more ideas. And then all of a sudden, you know, I'll see something that reminds me of something else, that reminds me of something else, that makes me think of this other thing, and all of a sudden I'm making a game about getting a key from a rat from an invisible monster. Like, it's hard to sort of like be able to have that little bit of idea freedom when you're just clouded by these ideas that you've been thinking about all the time. And so every single week I have a little bit of a house cleaning now of that thing that I've been thinking about. And it's really, really great because it does feel like a struggle to think of new ideas every single week, but it's sort of amazing what will fill that little gap in your head and what will peak and what will sort of grow out of that seed of just pure openness. Lots of ideas. And then lastly is just to sort of reflect on what your work was for the week. Usually for me, after a day of gaining feedback and sort of just reflecting on what I had created and how it went, I will write a little blog post, a little post-mortem that will focus on, where the idea came from, what was the inspiration behind it, what went right, what went wrong, what I learned. And I've really enjoyed that because after a while you start to see trends of problematic design behavior, problematic, time management behavior, for example, and things like that. And by sitting down and actually reflecting on them, you can see how much you're doing every single week. So, sometimes I make a game and I post it and I'm just like, okay, I didn't really do anything and I didn't learn anything, but okay, it's there. And then you sit down, and after people have played it, and you sit down, and you really, really think about what you did, you're just sort of amazed at what you've learned, without even sort of realizing it. And the only way that you can see those things is when you sit down and write a post-mortem or actually take the time to reflect on what you did. So this is a really important one. I also tend to examine a little bit beyond just the core making the game process, because we're all part of a very highly creative industry. So we are very heavily affected by our personal things, what's going on around us, what we were thinking, what we were feeling that week. And, I find it really, really helpful to delve into these feelings of fears and anxieties or hopes or dreams or whatever. So, those are sort of the rules of Game a Week and the motivations behind them, how they helped me, how they sort of affected my game making stuff. So did it help? After 38 weeks, have I learned stuff? Have I changed? Have I been, improved? And I'd have to go ahead and say yes, or else I probably wouldn't be up here talking about this. On my website, I have little preview images of every single one of my Game a Week games, and they're all in a grid. You can look at them and play them. But one of the interesting things is when I start to scroll through those games and I just sort of look at those images, you can really, really easily see the change in my skill set. The first few games, as you could see, were very unfocused looking. They were not clean looking. They sort of looked boring, like what is this? What does that even mean? And as you keep going, you can see that everything looks a little bit cleaner. I mean, there's obviously outliers here and there, but there's this general trend of just sort of improving. Everything looks a little bit more refined. Everything looks a little bit more real and a little bit more fun. And just, it's sort of interesting to me to scroll through these and just see how far I've come without really realizing it. And in addition to just sort of looking through these images, I can see it in myself, where I am, obviously a lot faster at prototyping now. I have greatly improved my ability to not overscope. I wouldn't say that I still don't overscope, but I'm better at it. I, know now more of what makes the experience that I want to make, what sort of, how I can budget my time, how I can budget my resources, and more of what I can handle. Each game, even though they look more interesting and better and cleaner, they're all simpler and simpler and simpler from the weeks before, because you realize how to pare down your designs and how to do this, because this time constraint is so small that you need just a tiny, tiny, tiny little mechanic to get it done in the week. And it's surprisingly difficult to make little tiny, tiny, tiny games because it's really easy to add things, and this stops you from adding things. In addition to sort of all this design and game making experience and everything, it's also affected a lot of, just how I feel about things around me. I'm sure most of you out there at some point has thought, wow, I'm never going to be as good at making games as so-and-so. They are awesome and so smart, and they always know what they're doing, and I am so stupid and so lost, and also I'm terrible. And you think these things to yourself, and you keep them in because you don't want other people to know that you're thinking these, because they'll think that you're weak and you're weird, and that would be terrible. And so you just sort of keep thinking these things, and it turns into this belief in your head that you are not good at things because, obviously people just don't realize how bad you are at things. And that's not a good feeling. And so by doing something like this and sort of making yourself vulnerable and putting your work that is not up to any standards and talking about what you're feeling and everything, you learn that you're not alone and that everybody thinks that, and it's okay and it's great. Well, it's not okay to think those things about yourself, but at least you're not alone. Everybody thinks those things. And it's interesting because some weeks when I say something, especially personal or something, I'll get a message and it'll be somebody saying that something I said or made or did, really resonated with them and really affected them in this way or that way, and that, that makes me feel good because yay. But more importantly, it sort of makes them feel good because, like I said, they know that other people are feeling or thinking or are on the same lines as them. And I think that's a really nice thing of talking about things and putting yourself out there, is that you allow for that opportunity for people to feel that feeling, that they can, sort of feel what you're feeling. And I think that's kind of amazing. Another thing is that it's taught me a lot about failure, because I fail a lot, even just in this, game a week thing. I have failed at making the game I've wanted to make. I have failed at learning the thing that I wanted to learn that week. And a lot of weeks I've sort of flat out just failed at making games. I also realized at 4 in the morning that I failed at spelling pretend. But let's pretend that was intentional. So every time you fail at something, you learn something from that. With Game a Week, I will learn something about my process or about just sort of pushing my limits, what I can and can't do week to week, because making a game every week is exhausting, and sometimes you can't do it. And that's okay, because failure is sort of a part of any meaningful endeavor in life. If you're not failing, you're probably not trying a lot of really interesting things, to be completely honest. And you can, you learn from success, obviously, because you learn what succeeds, but I always sort of find that you learn a lot more from failure, because we all sort of think about things a lot. We think about, what we want to do, what we could do if only we could do it. And I'll get there eventually. See, I'm learning. So we all think about things that we would want to do, that we would do if we could, and we think and we think and we think, but we so very rarely do things. And that was sort of one of the best things about doing Game a Week, is that it was a giant exercise in doing things. I was no longer just sort of sitting around and thinking about the things I wanted to do and the games I wanted to make and all these great things I could do. I was, actually just sort of doing them and building up on my failures and sort of my previous iterations, and I was just sort of finally doing all those things I wanted to do. So, yeah, thank you. This is me. You can follow me on the Twitters. I'm on the internet. I say things sometimes. This is Train Jam, in case you're interested in that. And then I also want to give a nice little shout out to a very talented pixel artist from Australia named Andrew Gleason, who last night when I said to him, hey, I'm going to make a game instead of a presentation, I need some art, he made some art for me. So you should go look at his art because he's super cool. So yeah, that's it. I don't know if there's like questions or what happens now. I could do a little dance.
Is there any questions?
Oh, lots of questions. I'll just fly around until we get the microphone going. I can't believe I forgot to show you guys that I fly. Okay. Yay. What? Oh no, I'm flying still. And he took it away.
Hey.
Hi. Wait, who am I looking at?
So,
oh,
yeah.
There you are. Hi.
So my question is, how do you earn a living?
So right now, when I first went indie, it was actually, I was sort of in a lucky position because, like I said, I had worked not in games for quite a long time and worked in like a well-paying career, and so I was able to save up a lot of money to fund the original part of me going indie. And since then, I will pick up contract work every now and again and do odd jobs here and there. Mostly, I try to live as cheaply as possible. One thing I did to do that was I actually stopped living anywhere last year. I let my apartment lease expire, and I just put everything in a storage unit that cost me $40 a month. And I just travel around now. I stay with friends. I stay with family. I'm a bit of a nomad, if it were. That time is sort of coming to an end because I am probably getting an apartment soon. But, you know, that was sort of, I looked for unconventional ways to live and unconventional ways to keep my costs down. I lived with my parents for like a month once. That was exciting. So yeah, it's a mixture of contract work, savings, and keeping my living costs as low as I can.